Hi, everybody. I'm Dave,
I'm John.
and we are Coffee and Capes.
Podcast about all things geek culture, brought to you by two middle-aged white guys. Yay!
The most underrepresented demographic in geek culture.
Yes, absolutely. Like, it's so overdue for this. But that's okay. This is what we're passionate about, and we enjoy talking about it, and hopefully people enjoy listening to us talk about it.
That is the hope. We know we will enjoy the conversation.
We'll enjoy it. That's really all that matters. At the end of the day, if other people enjoy it, I feel like, as always, I want to make the quick comment that based on something you said last episode, like, this is not meant to be a critique show. This is, what was the phrasing?
Enthusiasts. We are geek culture enthusiasts.
Yeah. And as such, I think if, always people are going to have comments and things that they want to say. Let's always keep them a little kinder. Like, yeah. The world can use a little bit of kindness. And honestly, like, geek culture can get pretty nasty sometimes. And so let's just try and be polite.
Yeah.
Polite.
That's a good goal.
Yeah. What coffee are you drinking today, Dave? I
am drinking the Organics brand, which I believe is the Jewel Osco brand, Guatemalan.
Oh.
A little organic, fair trade, I believe. Sure, like the organic, so what do you call it? Shade grown, that's it. Out of my Animate cup, which is company done some business with. So it's a good coffee in a very comfortable mug.
Nice.
How about you? What are you drinking today, John? I sound like Pinky, right? What are you drinking today, John?
The world.
Yes, exactly.
So today I'm drinking. Actually, this was mailed to us from my friend Joanne, and I don't know what it is. It's a micro roast. She was kind enough to include a little card in the bag. But it was literally just heat sealed beans inside of a thing, and I lost the card. But it is definitely.
How dare you?
I know.
You're a terrible friend.
I am a terrible friend. It's a medium roast, though. That much I know. I can tell by the bite in it, or the lack thereof. It's got some fruity undertones to it. It's actually a really lovely cup of coffee, and I believe it's from a Northern California micro roaster. She said she got it from a local shop up there, and she's a coffee enthusiast as well. So thanks, Joanne, for sending that out. And I am drinking mine out of a Starbucks. You can't see it anymore. Starbucks cup from Orlando, because I collect these things anywhere I go. And this was from a trip to actually Disney World.
Fun.
Yeah. Disney World before they got all the cool Star Wars stuff. Yeah, but that's okay. I'm still a kid at heart. Disney World was cool.
Yes, it is, and I am too. I've often been accused of that, but it never feels like an accusation to me. It just feels like, yeah, that's right. That's correct. I'm a kid at heart. I hope so.
100%. We're totally good.
Yeah.
So what's our topic today, Dave?
I believe we are talking today, John, about relative power of superheroes and how it seems to fluctuate. So I think we're calling this episode Powered Up.
Yes, we are. And this is a topic I feel like we have touched on in conversation over breakfast at Pancake Cafe.
Which I was at this week, by the way. I thought of you.
Nice.
Took my mom.
Nice.
Bacon is as amazing as ever.
Best bacon anywhere I've been is at
anywhere ever.
Yeah, anywhere ever, hands down. Shout out to Pancake Cafe. You guys do best bacon ever. But we've talked about this. I feel like many times it's come up, and it seemed like a good topic for today. And so you can see my background has old Steve Rogers, after his powers had been kind of removed from him and he was aged. I believe it was by the Illuminati. Strange, all those guys.
Yeah.
Because I believe this is what kicked off one of the major like crossover storylines that actually was good in Marvel, not one of the hastily thrown together ones to try and move more comic books that sometimes happens.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do an episode.
Yeah, we'll do an entire episode
on events or series or
yes.
yeah. Some of them have been really good, and some of them have been really not good.
Yeah.
But we'll not go down that rabbit hole at this point. So Steve Rogers, what about him, John? What about
that's a great
Cap power fluctuate, or how's he been powered up or powered down? What are you thinking about that?
Well, I think the image here shows a power down. We talked about this right before we started recording, and I think it's important to frame this in context. In some cases, there's a reasonable explanation for a power fluctuation, or a power change. And in other cases, it just feels like somebody threw something at the wall and said, yeah, okay, roll with that. And there's no explanation, and you're just kind of left going, when did this take place? So the Old Man Steve Rogers one, there was a reasonable explanation that took place in the comics for this one leading up to, I believe it was the Incursion event, actually. So if you haven't read that, it's a great crossover. It's multiverse, leads up to the Secret Wars crossover where Doom is God essentially, and you get all the battle worlds, and there's some weird stuff, and there's some like the zombie wall.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and like the Thors as like the Thor core,
yes,
or Angela and like 1640 or whatever. I don't know what it was. Like there was some. Honestly, okay, this an aside to go back to it, but that was, to me, one of the great moments of Marvel creativity. Like they went bananas with all that stuff, and it was so much fun.
Yeah, it really felt like they got all the writers in a room and said, if you could write about anything and have it involved in this crossover, what would you write about? And everybody just threw it out, and somebody said, we're doing it all.
Yeah.
And it was, I agree, super creative, lots of fun.
Yes.
A little weird at times.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right, but at the same time, you were like, oh, they're all interconnected, but they're all their own little like fiefdoms and worlds. And it was interesting to see how Doom reacted to being God over everything.
Yeah.
And how he manipulated the universe to kind of fit what he had always wanted, which was Susan Storm as his, right? Valeria as like kind of his daughter.
Right.
So it was strange as like the sheriff.
Yes.
Or the judge, the sheriff or the judge. I can't remember which one he was referred to as, but he was ultimately like kind of that authority, right? To your point, the Thors as kind of the police.
Yeah, somehow everybody was like, there were hundreds of Thors somehow, and
so many.
Yeah, it was. So in that sense, I guess it's kind of like what the MCU, what Disney Plus is doing with the What If right now, is like putting different characters in taking known characters and putting them in new different roles, like sort of as other characters.
Yeah.
In a way, I mean, it was more than that, but just. There's a piece of that idea in those comics, or a piece of that idea from those comics in the What If or whatever. But
yeah, and you're right. It was just super cool crossover. But and we've already taken our first side road, and that's okay. That's just how this podcast goes.
That's
if you
what
showed
we
up
do,
expecting
people. Right?
Linear conversation.
You're in the wrong place.
You're in the wrong place. But if you showed up with a little bit of like some bipolar personality disorder, you're good. You'll follow us. Some schizophrenia will appeal to you really well. So he was depowered kind of leading up to that, and the whole thing with the Illuminati. And so it made sense, right? And Steve Rogers' power level in the comics, I don't know that, and I went back and did some looking up after seeing something to see if there were massive power fluctuations. And I never saw Rogers with like massive unexplained power fluctuations, except for, and we've talked about this, the let me hold the helicopter in place scene in, yeah,
Right, like the
right, in Falcon and Winter, not Falcon, Winter Soldier, the Winter Soldier, Captain
Yeah.
America, the Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
That moment was a little surprising because in the very first like Captain America movie, and even in the first Avengers movie, he was stronger than others, but that was like, whoa. And it seemed like a massive jump from the beginning of that movie too. If we think about when he jumped out of the, you know, the like Quinjet essentially into the water and then stormed the ship, he had to do some legit fighting.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but if you're holding a helicopter in place with one arm and holding onto the building with the other, you hit Batroc one time.
Right. Right.
You're not getting up unless you are pulling that punch at like such an insane level.
Which I suppose is always going to be the creator's like excuse, right?
Yeah.
Oh well, he's just pulling his punch there. He's stronger than that, but he's just pulling his punch there.
But that would seem like a punch that's pulled from like full force to
Yeah.
you know, a little finger flick, like
right.
So I think that's the first major one I think that maybe kicked off this whole conversation. But Dave, you
and I remember, just to stick with the Cap thing for a bit, as you're talking about that, it reminds me, my memory is that in the early days, or at least the early days for me of Cap comics, which goes back to the 80s, I had this memory that it's described that Cap describes his power as, or it's described for him, that the super soldier serum made him the peak strength of a human being.
Yes.
So essentially as strong as a human could be, but not super strength, if you will. Like if there's on the scale, right? Like he's as strong and as agile and as essentially as fit or whatever as a human can be. And certainly we used to get a whole lot of training montages in those old Avengers comics or the Cap comics, right? That Cap's always honing his skills.
Yes.
But he was never like, oh, I'm going to punch through a door guy.
No, I mean he could use in the shield, right? If he ran at the door, he could go through the shield. I think it's reasonable to expect that drywall, right, or a door, if he's holding the shield and he's got a full head of steam,
sure,
right, he's going through that.
Right. But there's a big jump from peak human strength to I can hold a helicopter in place with one arm.
Yes, like that, and I agree with you. Like the very early stages of, you know, you and I came up in comics around the same time in the early 80s world.
Yes, we are.
But it was the same explanation, right? I remember that explanation. He was the peak of human like ability, strength, and speed.
Yeah.
And when you looked at like those old, almost there were a couple games that came out in the late 80s, I feel like early 90s, that were, you know, showed everybody's power sets and whatnot. And that was the same explanation there. He was never ramped up above that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we got that, which was repeated, I feel like, in the first What If with Captain Carter. Like a very odd ramp up in power when she tossed a tank in the air.
Tosses a tank in the air with very little effort.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which looked cool.
Always looks cool. And I want to make sure, like, because we could be crossing into critic territory, but it's not, because I enjoyed watching Cap hold that helicopter in place. I geeked out on it. I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. Right. And watching Captain Carter toss a tank over her head, that was fun too. But what we're talking about as enthusiasts, it doesn't jive with the history.
Yeah. And I guess in a sense, maybe as we're talking about this, it occurs to me that maybe in the MCU, he's always been more than just that, more than just a peak human. It's been more than that. Like he's a little stronger than like with the speed thing, or at the beginning of Winter Soldier, the movie when he's running, just literally doing laps on Sam, like
Right. That almost felt like Flash-esque.
yeah, yeah,
But when you consider, in all fairness, though, to that one, we don't actually know like how long they were running,
sure,
right? How far Sam, it wasn't like they showed Sam in the same 100-foot stretch of sidewalk. I think we were supposed to think like they've been running for a while. Otherwise, let's be honest, Sam Wilson was way out of breath for a very short run.
yeah, true, right,
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it still seemed like he was running faster than possible.
Well, doesn't Cap in the movies outrun cars at some point?
Yeah, but in all fairness, that's like World War II cars. And I gotta
Okay.
and you gotta think that in doing so, if we're talking about the peak of human physical performance, think about Usain Bolt,
Yeah,
right? In his sprinting ability. Now imagine being able to just do that for long distances,
yeah,
right? You could outrun some cars.
All right.
Which they
All right.
did in Civil War. There was that whole running through the tunnel, like him chasing Bucky, or him chasing T'Challa, chasing Bucky, and they were all running faster than all the cars in the tunnel.
Right. Yes.
Which is
Yes.
another, example of where we at, and maybe it's the MCU just to make it more cinematic, to more
It
appealing.
certainly was. Yeah.
Right?
And I'm okay with that. It's just an interesting not disagreement, but taking it in a different direction than the source material, which they should, right? I mean, it shouldn't. I've never been one of those guys like, oh my gosh, they can't change a thing. Like, that's one of the beauties of it, that you take a known character, a known idea, a known book, a known story, and tweak it for a new audience today. And I think that's some of what the MCU has done tremendously well.
Yeah, I think so too. Now we have other characters that we've discussed.
Yeah.
Your
so
favorite?
one of mine, yeah, Thor. Thor's long been one of my favorites, and in the last, I don't know, whatever it's been, 6, 8, 9 years, since Jason Aaron started his run on the Thor comic, it's been my favorite. I think that run is just
Phenomenal.
Peak Thor, where he did the 3 timeline thing. Thor kind of in the present, got young Thor before he's earned the right to wield Mjolnir, and then King Thor in the very very distant future. Like that whole thing, the God Butcher, Gore the God Butcher, that whole storyline, the art was phenomenal. I love every part of that. But it, contrasting to Thor comics of the 80s, or sometimes when he's, I don't know, getting beat up by Absorbing Man or something, or like what's the crew, the Wrecking Crew.
The Wrecking Crew.
Or probably not some street toughs exactly, but he's got to work pretty hard to beat some street gang thing, but then later he's flying through space at like phenomenal speeds.
Yeah, I think one of the ones for me was during the siege, and Thor got taken out by like Norman Osborne and some of the Red Hoods guys who had been powered up by Norn Stones.
Yeah.
And then, he turns around and destroys the Sentry with a few hits of lightning.
Yeah.
And flies up to the sun with the Sentry's body and puts it into the sun. And you're like, this is the same guy that got knocked unconscious by Norman Osborne and some like guys we've never heard from again.
Right. Yeah, it's funny how much the sun plays a role in this. So there's at the end of that Jason, or toward the end of that Jason Aaron run, spoiler alert here, Thor becomes unworthy, starts going by Odin's son, and somebody else picks up the hammer. There's a whole little era of time where we're not, it's kind of a mystery about who it is. But if you've seen any commercials for the upcoming movie maybe next year, Thor Love and Thunder, spoiler alert, Jane Foster becomes Thor for a while.
Right.
And there's this whole battle with this creature called the Man God that has the power of a billion murdered souls.
Yes.
So that's a lot. It's very strong. Yeah. And this Man God creature takes out a newly powered Volstagg as War Thor, destroys his hammer.
Right, I forgot about that.
Odin's son can't take him out. Thor, new Thor, Jane Thor, does all she can. Like, it's just, toe to toe, can hardly take him down. And finally, she defeats him by somehow tying Mjolnir to Mangog and throwing Mjolnir into the sun. And the sun presumably destroys, melts, whatever, both the hammer and the Mangog.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward a little bit in this story, the War of Realms, and Odin's son now back Thor again, and Jane Foster has become something else. The Thor we know and love, the Thor son of Odin guy, needs his last little piece of Mjolnir that still exists somewhere in the sun, and so he goes for swims in the sun, apparently seeking it out. It comes out okay, and eventually finds it, and it's great and it's wonderful, and the art is fantastic, and the story's like, you're like, oh my gosh, he's coming back, this is so cool, and I love it. But can fly into the sun multiple times. What's that?
But it's a perfect example of what we're talking about, right? Yeah. The weird power fluctuation that doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah.
And then there's others that we've heard are just super powerful, right? And then you've never really seen like the full metal of like how powerful they're supposed to be. Yeah. One interesting thing on that is, and I don't know if you ever read much of this after we talked about it, but was the Ultimate Marvel universe, right? Which went away when they did the whole incursion, like multiverse thing, and a very cool storyline where we got like, the different Nick Fury and Miles Morales became part of everything.
Right.
But in that Ultimate universe, some of the heroes had very different personalities, very different power sets, which they're supposed to, right? In the Ultimate series. But Magneto in the Ultimate universe was powerful enough to reverse the polarity of the entire planet. Right? And does it, and literally like the oceans rise up and like drown most of the like New York, and we lose all these superheroes and everything else. And he literally does all this damage to the planet because he's so strong and he has such control over the magnetic force that he just switches the polarity of the planet. Which,
I'm no scientist, but that would be catastrophic, right?
Yeah, it's bad. It's like good, bad, it's here.
Okay.
Right? Not
down. Fuzzy on the whole good or bad thing.
Whole good or bad thing.
Imagine every molecule of your body exploding at the speed of light. And that would be bad?
That would be bad.
Okay, good safety tip.
The original Ghostbusters.
Yes. Let me close the loop on the Thor thing for a second. And obviously these are very different iterations of the character, but on the one hand, you've got superpowered Thor flying multiple times into the sun and basically just going for swims in the sun. And then just this fall, we've had in the What If series, the one episode, Thor gets shot by an arrow, a regular old Earth arrow that pierces him somehow, the thing the sun can't do, and kills him. An arrow, a dude that flew into the sun. So I guess that's to me, that's kind of the sort of thing we're talking about. And it doesn't make me enjoy it any less. It's just, for me, I can't help but notice those sorts of things. Like,
right. Yeah. There's
flying to the sun, killed by an arrow.
And so the interesting thing about it in Marvel is that we don't get a lot of explanation for power fluctuations.
Yeah.
It doesn't really, if somebody like suddenly ramps up their power, we don't get a lot of explanation. I think the character that we've seen with a considerable amount of power fluctuation, at least over the time that I followed him, that actually probably gets the most explanation would be Spider-Man. Like he suddenly gets the symbiote suit, and that he gets stronger as a result, or something happened. The original Secret Wars, I want to say he got powered up like way back in the 80s again, and he received some power ups, and then they would go away and he'd come back down to normal. Yeah. And there was some nice like storyline that explained it. The point with like Thor, we never get that explanation. It's just you just follow along, and it's kind of the way it's supposed to be. On the flip side of this, and we were talking about this just before, DC, I think, does a really good job of introducing new and improved or new ramped up like power sets for long-standing characters. And the one that comes to mind that I think we've seen that kind of evolution of is the Flash.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Right. When he first came out, he was just the fastest man alive.
Yeah.
He was run around, and that's what he did. And then as time's gone on, he has developed the ability to, time travel.
It's a slight power up.
Right? Go through, like, vibrate through walls and things.
Yeah.
And these are all things that he's learned essentially to do with his own powers as time has gone on. So it makes sense. And they've done a nice job of like, if it doesn't need a power up, don't do it, like Superman.
Well, let's talk about Superman for a second.
All right.
Because at one point, we all know that the little ditty, the little jingle, right? That, leaps tall buildings with a single bound. So somehow we're going from, well, he can jump really high to those jumps become actually flying, right, to, well, he can basically fly the speed of light or something.
But I think we saw a progression for that.
Okay.
Right. And if you want a good example of that, there's a really fast progression to that with Henry Cavill's Superman in Man of Steel, where his first couple attempts to fly were just really big jumps.
Yeah.
Right. And then he like went through this process of like bigger jumps, and then, figured out he could fly. So I think that one, there is a precedent for a progression in that one.
So maybe it's more about learning to use the power rather than just,
there you go,
all of a sudden the power's there.
Or not there.
Yeah.
And with Superman, and I think that if we want to compare Superman and Thor, which I think is probably the closest comparison that makes sense, unless you bring in the Marvel Justice League, which is like Squadron Supreme.
Oh my gosh, has there been a bigger ripoff of one comic from the other than that?
I don't think so.
That's a whole other conversation, but
that's a whole other conversation. We're not going to go there today.
We even have Princess Power now, who literally looks exactly like Wonder Woman.
Yes.
I don't understand.
Although she is definitely a darker, more violent version. But I mean, you've got Blur, who is the Flash, and you've got Nighthawk, who is Batman, and anyway, we can go down this road forever.
Right.
But if we just take Superman and Thor, which I think are the two fairest comparisons, probably, and this is a possible reason that we've seen these weird fluctuations with Thor, and we haven't really experienced them with Superman, is Superman had a very clear Achilles heel. Kryptonite.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
100%, that's his Achilles heel. He's unstoppable, basically, in any other fashion. Can fly up to the sun gives him all this, this power. He can fly through space.
Right.
He can pick up tall buildings with his strength and then leap them.
Tall buildings
But-
are easier to leap, I hear, when you can pick
Yeah.
them up and put them
when
down.
you can pick them, because you just lay them down on their side. And
Right. Yeah. Then it's
It
just
weighs
basically
it.
yeah.
Or you
yeah,
do the running long jump and
Right.
yeah, you don't have to jump as high, it's just distance.
Work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. See, we got this. But he had his Achilles heel. They get like DC gave him a way to be beaten.
Yeah.
Right. A couple
And
of
lead, maybe a little lead lining.
right, kryptonite, red lining, and a red sun. Remember,
Right,
the red sun
right.
drains him as well.
Yeah.
So he was given like 3 very like reasonable explanation ways that he could be depowered or powered down,
Yeah.
and then in turn be beaten by others.
Yeah.
I can't think of a time except for becoming unworthy,
Yeah.
which is like was a big deal, right? That was huge. I can't think of anything, and you know Thor better than I do, so I'll defer to
there's
you on
nothing in
it.
particular. I mean, back in the day when it was still the Donald Blake thing, if he was away from his the hammer for 60 seconds, he would revert back to Donald Blake. So that was always a thing.
Which is an interesting way to go about it, I guess.
Yeah, but that hasn't been part of the character for a long time.
Except for the run, and you're always ahead of me on comics because I use the Marvel Unlimited app, which
Yeah, that's what I've been doing lately too, actually.
have you?
So
Okay.
yeah, so it's 6 months behind the publication date, but
Yeah.
just the most recent thing, like where Donald Blake came back and kicked everybody's ass. Like
Yes.
that was, talk about a power up. But that was attempted to be explained by, he took all the power of the Midgard serpent, and then he somehow had some of Thor's power, and
it was a reasonable explanation. There was a reasonable explanation to get us there.
yeah,
It wasn't like a blind leap of like, hey, he's here and he's super strong and you just have to believe it. Moving on,
Yeah. So back to the Thor Superman the comp here is that because there's not the clearly defined weakness for Thor, if he's going to be beat at some point, you just catch him on a bad day essentially or something, and that's how he gets beat occasionally.
Which is a tough one to swallow, because that's like hitting Superman when he gets out of bed and he's got a headache or something, and all of a sudden like he goes down and you're like, no, because he's still break your hand on his face.
Right. Does Superman have to sleep? I don't know.
Hibernate maybe?
Right. Right.
Does he hibernate while he recharges his batteries?
Yeah. Does he just do it to fit in? I don't know. I don't know where that ends.
Be great if he slept like hovering in the air. And
right. At some point he's got to, right? At some point you just accident, right? So, more Ghostbusters. He sleeps above the covers, 6 feet above the cover.
Yes. Yeah, that would be great. I'd like to see that one. The Ghostbusters Superman crossover.
Yes.
Where they think he's a ghost because he can fly in Venkman.
Well, okay, so let's stick with DC for a second. If it seems to me, DC's characters are more likely to have a defined weakness than Marvel characters.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can think of one even for Marvel. That's equivalent to kryptonite, or like
right.
The dumbest one ever, right, is Green Lantern. Oh, he can't affect the color yellow.
Yeah. But we got a whole thing around that too, with yellow being the fear one, and then we got the Blackest Night, which is
and I haven't read that stuff, so maybe I need to. I shouldn't be
Johns,
so critical until I've read all that stuff. But.
Yeah, like the Jeff Johns, like Brightest Day, Blackest Night, like Lantern crossover series. I'm a huge Green Lantern fan. That was my favorite DC character when I was a kid.
Okay.
And I'm going to say this, and it'll make me wildly unpopular and probably discredit me extremely, but I even enjoyed like Ryan Reynolds and the Green Lantern movie. I feel like that got an unnecessary bad rap. There were definitely some things in there that you're like, this isn't what I wanted to see. But Reynolds did a great job. The grief that he caught, like he played, if you read Green Lantern, and I'm on a tangent now, but if you read the Green Lantern stuff early on with Hal Jordan's cocky.
Mm-hmm.
He was a cocky pilot.
Right.
He had this like cavalier attitude. And when Reynolds played that on screen, there was so much backlash on that.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. For all of you born in the 90s, those of us born in the 70s, remember how this character came about and what he was really like early on. This is how he was.
Yeah.
This is very true to the source material. Now, I could have, like, the suit was a little much, the glowy suit, but that's nitpicky. You know, right. I feel like that's nitpicky. Parallax, I would have preferred we didn't get Parallax right out of the gate. Like, it would have been cool to get Sinestro right out of the gate. Yeah. But I get it. They were trying to do some origin story thing, and Parallax was a big deal in like Green Lantern lore, and I get it. But the knock on that movie is it tried too much in its short time frame. Yeah. Anyway.
And I guess as you're thinking about from power standpoint, theoretically, Green Lantern's power is unlimited. It's limited only by the force of his will. Mm-hmm. Right? And how long his battery lasts, which, boy, there's a good metaphor. We're all used to that. Oh, you know, my phone can do everything except it's
dead.
Except it's dead.
I forgot to plug it in.
Yeah.
Which is cool, right? Because there's the, to your point, that's the Achilles heel for Green Lantern, right? There's a couple of them. Yeah. The battery, how strong is his will, and the color yellow, right? Yeah. And what I think we don't see enough of in Marvel that helps with this whole like overpowered thing, aside from like the Achilles heel that DC attaches to a lot of their characters, is they also gave them almost like a polar opposite that was geared specifically to take that one person out. So Green Lantern had Sinestro, right? Superman had Lex Luthor, and eventually we got like General Zod and, you know, some others. You had Aquaman and Black Manta, right? You had Batman and Joker. I mean, it goes on. You had the Justice League and the League, was it the League of Evil? No.
Legion of Doom.
Legion of Doom. Thank you. I don't know where I got League of Evil from. I know better.
I think that was in the pitch meeting, and I don't think it didn't leave that initial.
But I mean, and each person in the Legion of Doom was a direct counter to somebody in the Justice League. Yeah, right. That's how it was created.
Now, what I want to know about the Legion of Doom is, where did they get that oversized Darth Vader helmet to be their base?
From Darth Vader. Good point. But and you know, there's other. I think there's other really nice examples of that in geek culture as well. You know, you got Star Wars, very clearly, right?
There's big fluctuations with power with the Jedi powers. Yeah. And the Sith powers. Like, what all can you do and what can you not do? And
I mean, especially if you've ever read any of the books, or you've really like taken the time to like dive into what they're supposed to be able to do. I mean, in some of the storylines, like Luke's supposed to be able to pull planets out of orbit.
Seems like
that's insane.
Yeah, that's a large power.
But we've never seen that from him. I think one of the things that people got the most upset about in the new Star Wars trilogy is they were hopeful to see more like displays of this epic power level from Luke Skywalker than they got, right?
But when they saw just a little bit of power displayed from Leia, everybody lost their mind.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, we'll have to do an entire episode on. I feel like the misogynistic reactions that we
gosh.
see within geek culture
Yeah.
to things like the most recent one around She-Hulk. Like there was a bunch of backlash, people coming in and saying, oh, we're gonna get girl versions of every character now. What the heck? And blah blah. And to Marvel's credit, they did a really nice response with She-Hulk was created by Stan Lee. Like
been around a long time.
Way back in the day. Like she's not a new we'll go down that rabbit hole another time because geek culture, shame on you for this kind of thing. Like embrace things, would you? But yeah, we've seen weird power-ups or power downs or power dampening, if you want to refer to it as that way, within the Jedi culture as well. Darth Vader's in comics, Darth Vader is terrifying.
Oh my gosh. From maybe 6-8 years ago, the first when Marvel started doing the Star Wars comics again, the first run of Darth Vader was phenomenal. Because there've been a couple of volumes. I've only read a couple of them, I think. There've been like multiple volumes, but if those of you who've seen the movie, if you've seen the end of Rogue One, that little bit of Darth Vader where he's just this force of nature that you either run away from or you get demolished by. Like that's him in those comics, and it is, as you say, it's terrifying. It's phenomenal to witness.
Yeah, there's an issue, and I can't remember it, but it's been a few years where and I don't think it's the Darth Vader comic series. I think it's the actual Star Wars comic series, right? From kind of the New Hope era, and the rebels think they have Darth Vader cornered. And they come at him with like all these like X-Wings and everything else. And he basically stands essentially on a cliff and takes down like an entire squadron of X-Wings, an entire battalion of rebel scum with what looks like very minimal effort. Like nobody can touch him. And his, what I like to refer to as the Skywalker whining gene that we saw in the Star Wars movies. It's not fair. Is in his like Vader's that we get to be witness to in like Phantom Menace and everything else that he grows up with, that he passes on to Luke, and obviously didn't pass on to Leia. She never really whined. She was like the strongest mentally out of all of them.
Absolutely.
But Anakin's whininess and stuff that we all feel like made him, me in the comics is non-existent. Like he couldn't care less about you or your feelings,
right?
Or like where you came from or your connection to anything. And you have kids.
Like, right.
Like wipes out entire families, entire planets without thinking twice about it.
Yeah. Unless he thinks you might be useful to him for a moment or two to achieve a goal or two. And the moment you stop being useful to him, you probably stop being alive.
Yeah, agreed, right? Agreed. And so it's a phenomenal job with him in the comics. I think that Darth Vader in the comics is probably the more accurate version of what we were led to believe he's supposed to be against what he was in the movies.
Right. Yeah, that fear that he evokes in everybody is hinted at and talked about. It's the old thing, like it's the whole problem with a piece of the George Lucas writing. I think the old adage of show don't tell, and Lucas was terrific at telling you and not always so good at showing you. Like, oh yeah, we see that we're afraid, but we're told everybody's afraid of Darth Vader, but we don't really see it. Glimpses, and maybe in 1976 they couldn't really, they just didn't have the ability to show it in the same way.
I feel like he got his opportunity to show in Revenge of the Sith. We saw Anakin, when he turns, go into the Jedi Temple and killed everybody, including the younglings.
Yeah, right.
Right. And it wore on him, and he, but it also pushed him way over the edge, like full blown dark side. It just, by the way, there's a meme out there. I don't know if anybody's seen it, where it's the ghost of Anakin talking to Ben Solo, and Ben Solo's asking, grandfather, do you have any advice for me? And Anakin says, when someone tells you not to do it because they have the high ground, you listen. So,
that's funny.
So I think that's the only moment outside of Rogue One, right? Those are probably the two moments in cinematic history with Darth Vader where we saw the brutality, the raw power, and just that, like, I don't have feelings, right?
And soon you will neither it. You won't have anything either.
None, not a tostada. Well, my friend, I think that brings us to the end of our time.
Yeah. We hope you enjoyed Powered Up.
Next week, we'll have some other thing to ramble on about for close to an hour that hopefully you enjoy just as much as you enjoyed this one.
Yeah, and that's gonna be our goal. We're gonna shoot for a weekly episode.
Yeah, it's a good goal. We should tell people where they can find us now, because you can find us on things, right? So we're available. You can find the video version on YouTube, but there's really no need for that. We're not.
It's just a video of us talking.
Yeah, it's
not
really
that interesting.
not exciting. Maybe at some point in the future we'll have some neat thing where we'll show you images of videos or something. Who knows? But right now it's just two middle-aged white guys talking. So you're more than welcome then, in that case, to go to Spotify. You can find Coffee and Capes on Spotify if you have Spotify podcasts. We'll be coming soon to iTunes. That's exciting. And I think we should, and we didn't talk about this, but I'm gonna throw it out there before we hang out. If you're listening to this and you fancy yourself a comic book artist, we should run a contest. We are actively seeking someone to create us a logo for Coffee and Capes. Neither one of us are artists per se, but maybe we can run a little contest. And if somebody can submit a logo that we like, we give them something cool, like some coffee and like a subscription to Marvel Unlimited or something.
So more than just our undying love and appreciation is what you're saying.
Yeah,
something a little more tangible than that.
A little more tangible,
That's
right?
probably a good idea.
A little more tangible.
And just for the record, it's Coffee Capes.
Yes.
Apostrophe and apostrophe.
Yeah. Coffee apostrophe N apostrophe Capes.
Yes.
Coffee and Capes.
Because we're also grammar geeks like that. Actually.
Yeah, if you look up Coffee and Capes, I can't be responsible for what you find.
Correct.
Yeah, and it is the interwebs. Who knows what you'll find?
You might not want to find it.
You might not want to find it.
But you do want to find us.
Yes.
Coffee and Capes. John and Dave. Thanks so much for journeying with us. You'll hear us. I was gonna say you'll see us next time. You'll hear us next time. Or maybe you'll see us
next week. Yeah.
Until then.
Bye guys.